Some teachers think that the teacher needs to be working the hardest in a classroom, but this can be a mistake. And that's what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, the question, who is supposed to do the most work in the classroom, is so relevant if you're a teacher, if you're a leader, if you're trying to give content to adult learners. And what I'd like to suggest is that in the classroom setting, both the teacher and the students need to be working if anybody is going to learn anything. Unless you, as a student, when you're learning something new, unless you have to think and put some effort into it and to question and to talk and to wrestle and to chew, you actually will not learn anything new. Learning has to be active.
I mean, I've certainly myself been very passive in some teachings, and I've been a teacher where I've got people like slumped and they're not doing anything, and I'm like, nothing's happening in their brain. But
Mhm.
what does that look like? So if the students are working, if the
Yeah.
students are putting an effort, well, what does that look like in a classroom?
Just think about how you learn when you are a passenger versus like in the driver's seat. So being a very specific example about driving in a car somewhere, I think about times where I have been the passenger with my brother's driving or my dad's driving, somebody else I know is driving somewhere, and we're having a chat and I'm talking and I'm enjoying it and we get there. And then the next time I'm supposed to drive there on my own, but I actually don't remember where I was supposed to turn or which highway to take or which road to take, which turn off, even though I've literally been in the car, driven with them maybe multiple times. But something different happens in my brain and in an adult's brain, in people's brains, when we have to actively participate versus passively just sort of observing. This is a great example to use in terms of learning and education in classroom settings, is that if we just expect students to sit and do what they're told, then they may, but they can't then reproduce what they've learned because they haven't actually learned it. They've just been observing.
Oh, you've got some statistics of just how people learn.
Along with this idea that being active is actually going to help you learn more, there's been studies done about what types of activities actually help somebody to learn and to retain knowledge and information. So here you see that if you are just attending a lecture, you will only remember or retain 5%. If you're reading, it goes up to 10%. If there's audio and visual, 20%. Demonstration, 30%. Discussion, 50%. Practice, so if you're doing it yourself, 75%. And then if you have to teach to somebody else, you will remember 90% of and retain what you've learned. So it's a huge difference. So as you move up that or down that list, the more energy and effort that's required of the learner, the more you actually learn.
I love it. That's eye-opening.
Mhm.
But a lot of teachers think like it depends on them. Like they've got to put in the work, they've got to study the material, and then they've got to present it in an interesting way. What's wrong with that?
Well, yeah, I think that teachers, as a teacher, we carry a heavy load. We really want to be the perfect teacher. We want to be entertaining and fun. We want to be profound and have these great insights. We want to keep people laughing, engaged. We want them to feel encouraged. Sometimes it feels more like we should be like a stand-up at a comedy club or like we're on stage performing something. We just want people to go, wow, that's so great. Wow, that's so wonderful. It's great to be an interesting teacher who knows your material. But that can be a very different thing because then if your student is just passively listening to you and being entertained,
Mm.
they may not, as we saw from that list, actually walk away with any new knowledge or information. And I can think about that times all the thousands of church services I've been to and sermons that I've sat through that were very interesting and funny. And if you ask me the next day or the next week what I actually learned, it's usually very little because I didn't do anything. Sometimes I didn't have a conversation about it. I didn't have to do anything differently. I just sat. It was just like watching an episode of TV. And you don't learn a whole lot and remember a whole lot from that.
I think that's the key. What are the students walking away with that they can like put into practice or that's going to shape or change them? And I could do a really entertaining, profound lecture, but if they have like 5%, that's
Mhm.
like that's not worth all the effort I'm putting into preparing. I like this. The students working and engaging is going to help them own that teaching for themselves.
Mhm. We see the difference between just sitting passively and listening to something versus doing that, doing an activity. Um, when you have to write a paper and you have to do um, make a presentation or even building a cabinet from IKEA, you like
Yep.
you can tell if you've done it right because you actually at the end you have a cabinet or you have a presentation. Something is actually required of you, which is forcing you to keep working and problem solving. And maybe you do it wrong, you have to take it apart. Maybe it doesn't sound good. You scratch it out. If you're writing a paper, you redo it, you ask for help. To truly accomplish something and learn something to achieve your goal, there's a work is required if it's going to be valuable. You can have a teacher talk to you about hospitality and give you Bible verses and explain to you all this information, but that will be very different than if you, as a class, you go and you bake cakes and then you go visit the senior's home and you have a conversation with an elderly woman or man and you have a cup of tea together. That is actually doing hospitality, not just learning about it. They're both important, but um, I think sometimes as teachers, we just want to say nice things and we think that people will learn from that.
I love that example of, yeah, actually putting it into practice.
Mhm.
What else can this look like in the classroom?
Well, actually, let me back up a little bit to give another example from a classroom setting in a really like concrete, measurable way. So I used to teach English as a second language. And when I first started, I really thought that my job was to just really impress the students with how wonderfully I spoke English. What I wasn't taking into consideration was that like they were there to learn English, how to speak English themselves, not there to listen to me speaking English. And I think my first few weeks of teaching until my supervisor came in and helped me to improve. Let's say we had a 60-minute class, I would talk for 45 minutes and I would explain grammatical points, I'd write them on the board. And then for, let's say, the last 15 minutes of the class, I would go around person by person and they would each answer a question. So, as a student, you could have sat through a whole hour class and spoken English for 1 minute. It's going to take
Mm,
a long time to learn English if you only speak 1 minute per class. And my supervisor encouraged me to get the students to work more. And what this practically looked like in that setting was, so let's say I spoke for 30 minutes and I still just explained all the grammar. And then for the other half an hour, they were in pairs talking one-on-one. So all of a sudden, then the student is talking for 15 minutes and actively listening for comprehension for the other 15 minutes. So now they've gone from 1 minute to 15 minutes and 15 minutes. But maybe even better would be if I only talked for 10 minutes and they had the other 50 minutes to talk, to back and forth. Maybe they had a group project. Maybe they had to solve a problem. Maybe they had to play a game. Maybe they had to use their language skills in a way that was practical. Not everyone's teaching English, but let's talk about in like classroom setting some examples
right.
maybe of what you've done to get the students working more.
I love that example. I know for me, I'm often teaching on topics that are going deep in the Bible. And so, what I've learned is if I stand up there and say, hey, this is what Paul was saying about gifts of the Spirit, they might be taking notes. And so now I don't do that. I have them read what did Paul
Mhm.
say about gifts of the Spirit. And they have a discussion. They're in a small group and they pick the things out. I'll even send them to the whiteboard and I want you to write them down. And then we'll discuss as a big class.
Mhm.
And I've had students say thank you. I actually never read that part of First Corinthians. We got in a really good discussion. So they're owning it. Now I'm keeping track. There's probably 4 or 5 points I want to make sure they get, right?
Yeah.
And if they don't, I might write it on the whiteboard. But they're engaged and they're working. I want you to find it because you're adults and you can think.
Yeah, I think recognizing that it takes longer for people to come to their own conclusions than for me to just tell you what to think. But in terms of actually learning, it will be more effective and students will learn more if they do the work. So exactly what you're saying. I remember doing a study on Acts 17, and instead of me just saying the 7 points I wanted people to learn, we printed it out and they all got a copy. And then I had very specific questions on the board. So I'm still guiding them and leading them. I still have an objective and an outcome I'm aiming for as a teacher, but I'm letting them walk along the path to get there instead of just being like, ta-da, here we are at the final finish line. The things that they learn, it it always feels like it's deeper, it's richer because they've discovered it themselves.
Like we said, that's in the end of the day, I want students to walk away owning some of them. It's unrealistic to think they're going to understand everything and own all of it, but I want them to own some of it and
Mhm.
incorporate it into their life. And that's not going to happen unless they're putting in some effort and not just sitting there passively.
So I think as a teacher, for me, where we started was this like who is supposed to be doing the work in the classroom and recognizing that both the teacher and the students need to work if there's actually learning is going to happen. So if it's just the teacher, then it's not even really learning, it's just a presentation. And the presentations can be enjoyable, they can be valuable, but it's not the same as actually learning. So this invitation to get the students to do the work, knowing that it's for their good and it's for their benefit. Some questions for you who are watching this video would be the first one is, yeah, what is your view on who's supposed to do the work in the classroom? Is it the teacher? Is it the students? Is it both? Does it depend? What does it depend on? So that would be the first question. What's your view about who's doing the work?
Another question we want you to consider is think of yourself when you've been a student. What were activities that helped you learn the most?
And the third question would be if you like the idea of students possibly doing more work and being less observers and more participating, what obstacles or drawbacks do you see that might get in the way of you as a teacher and as a leader getting the students to work more?